I'm going to show you, take you through a case study. History repeats itself, just sometimes you don't recognize it. But I'm going to take you through some things where history absolutely repeated itself. Ever heard of de Havilland? De Havilland was an aircraft maker in the United Kingdom, de Havilland. And they built a series of airplanes, such as this one we're going to show you. This is called the Mosquito. And this airplane was built around World War II. And you can see the symbol on the side of the aircraft for the, okay, we're going to get that in a minute here. It was a military jet that was for the Royal Air Force. And so, known for making these great aircraft. And they started in 1949 to prototype the first jet aircraft that would be commercial, and it would carry people. And so I think we have the first de Havilland Mosquito, so let's take a look at that. So you can see what this is. This is de Havilland Mosquito. Very successful bomber that was built for the Royal Air Force. The target there is a symbol for the RAF, Royal Air Force, the UK. So in other words, this is a company that knew what they were doing when it came to building planes. Then they built this plane called the Comet. So we're going to take a look at this now. This is the de Havilland Comet. Look at that. See those two holes? Those were jet engines that they called the ghost engines. So there were jet engines inside the wing. This plane held about 25 to 35 people in addition to the crew and luggage. And this was, you're looking at the first commercial jet airliner ever. You can see the front, very sleek and everything. So this aircraft was built 1949 with its prototype, and it had a commercial debut in 1952. So in 1952, it has its commercial debut. It could reach speeds of 500 miles an hour, which cut the time going from New York to London in half. Because you had Pan Am, you see these big pictures, these old Pan Am jets with the 4 propellers. It's just amazing. But they were big propellers. They only flew 250, 275 miles an hour, something like that. And here you had this fly 500 miles an hour, and it had an altitude of 40,000 feet. Well, what do you know about 40,000 feet? You've all seen movies where airplanes traveling up there, window breaks open, and people get sucked out and all this drama. But that's real, because up at 40,000 feet, there's a whole different set of stresses that are up there versus only 10,000 feet. But at 40,000 feet, you can fly faster and above weather. You're above the clouds. You've all seen that, looking out there, you see the clouds and everything. So you can go places faster, you're above the weather, you fly around weather, all these things that make commercial air travel efficient. So here you have the de Havilland Comet, born in 1949, launched in 1952. And then something happened. In January of 1954, 20 minutes after taking off, a de Havilland Comet broke up mysteriously. Remember, this is before terrorist bombings and before suicide bombers and before people put a bomb in luggage. This is before all that. This is before Pan Am 104 that crashed in Lockerbie, Scotland, because Libyan-sponsored terrorists downed it, that 747 with people on it. This is before all that. This thing breaks up. It wasn't shot down. It wasn't a bomb. And they're trying to figure out, why did this thing break up and crashed into the Mediterranean right near the island of Elba? And if you know your history, I think that's where Napoleon was exiled, was the island of Elba. All 35 people on board Paris. It's like, I think it was 26, 27 passengers and 8, 9 crew. They couldn't figure out why. The Havilland engineers are going through and trying to figure out, why did this airplane fall out of the sky without a mayday signal from the pilot? So something suddenly happened, not progressively. What do we know about the news this weekend, Kellyanne? That sub went and imploded suddenly, not progressively. Did they have a notice? Had they dropped their ballast and going to the surface? Some people said, so that would mean that Stockton, make sure I said that right.
Stockton
yeah,
Rush?
Yeah, Stockton Rush knew there was a problem and he was heading for the surface, you know? So maybe they had some awareness, but the actual disaster happened like that. Well, that's what happened to the de Havilland Comet. But why? So they made a bunch of changes, made a bunch of things going on. And remember I told you that was in January 10th? So I think they were grounded for the better part of a month while they did these, and they went back to flying. On April 8th, now we're talking January 10th, April 8th, January, February, March, April. 90 days later, it happens again. South African Airways departs Rome for Cairo, flying across the Mediterranean. Rome, Italy to Cairo, south. 14 passengers and crew. As it climbed toward 35,000 feet, it gave a radio message. It says, hey, I got this compass heading. I'm heading on my way. And suddenly it breaks up and falls into the Tyrrhenian Sea there. And the next day, they found floating debris, and they also were able to go down and salvage pieces in the water. It was right near the island of Stromboli, believe it or not. Everyone dies. So this is the second failure of a comet in just 3 months. BOAC grounds the entire fleet. That's British Overseas Air Company. I think it was BOAC. I may have that wrong, but it was the name of the airline. And de Havilland's now doing all this research. The British Air Ministry, which is like their FAA, Federal Aviation, revokes the Comet's license to fly. You cannot fly. You can't test fly. You can't take commercial people. You're grounded. It's because they had to go figure out what was going on. And this is what they did. Let's take a picture here. They were analyzing the side of the aircraft, and you notice it had square windows. And you see those arrows where they could see where it tore. And they said, it's kind of interesting. Why is the aircraft kind of tearing almost like undotted lines? So they did a thing where they took a fuselage from a de Havilland Comet and they put it in a water tank that they could then hyper-pressurize. So they're trying to simulate, using a water tank, the plane under pressure as it's flying. Because they're trying to figure out, why do we get up to 40,000 feet and this thing basically tears apart? And there's no mayday from the pilot. There's no shaking or rattling and something's happened. It just tore itself apart and fell out of the sky. Here's what happened in the water tank. This is not a part of the aircraft from one of the crashes. This was the water tank. They did the water tank, and during the testing, they suddenly have this rupture. And they look at it, and they realize that they had not sufficiently tested or knew about the long-term effects of going up under pressure, come back down, no pressure. Going up, pressure, going back down, no pressure. Think of it this way. These airplanes going up and down on all these flights were progressively pressuring and what's called fatiguing the aircraft. They figured out, and they came back and said that based on what they saw in the water tank, was that the Comet fuselage and airframe could be expected to fail and just rip apart from progressive fatigue from 1,000 to 9,000 pressure cycles. We call those flights. Guess what? The accident that went in the Mediterranean by the island of Elba, 1,290 flights. And the South African Airways that was going from Rome to Cairo, 900 flights. Right where the engineers, once they had done this testing, figured it out. They said, you know, around 1,000 flights, anything above that, you've got metal stress and fatigue. But look at what they did. They could have tested this. They could have figured it out. But we've been building airplanes forever. We've been building airplanes since World War II. But this was the first commercial jet airliner flying 500 miles an hour at 40,000 feet. And it looks like more testing was needed, because the more they did, the more they found out that the airline was doomed by its own design. A combination of the way they built the airframe, the type of aluminum they used, how close together the fasteners and bolts were, and the square windows. Look at all that. Look at all those things they discovered that with more research, they could have found out, hey, you're putting square windows on an airplane, you're doing this, and this, we had a problem. You know what it was? It was hubris. De Havilland was still run by its family members who believed they had built this amazing jet and they wanted to get it into service to be competitively in front of other people. Hubris got a total of 75 some people killed on these. By the way, there would be another comet that would fall out of the sky flying into a severe storm, and the storm was so severe that it also collapsed the fuselage, and that one crashed. That was related to a storm, and the pilots should not have been attempting to fly in that storm, but the same dynamics were there. That when you got these stresses on it, that it was beyond, that the actual stresses of repeated flights or of a massive storm was beyond what the airplane could bear. And yet you're trying to put this into 10-year service life to carry people and commercial things? When test pilots die, it's a tragedy, but they accept the risk as test pilots. When people are paying money commercially, it's hubris, liability, carelessness, recklessness that leads to loss of civilian life that are paying money. This is hubris, folks. This is hubris. And I'm going to give you one more example. Do you remember the 737 MAX a couple years ago? In 2019, Boeing 737. Now, everybody knows what a Boeing 737 is. If you're here in America and you've ever flown Southwest, all they fly is Boeing 737s. It's an incredibly reliable airplane that's been around for years and years and years. They introduced a new version with advanced flight software and an advanced design. And it was called the 737 MAX. And it was in service for a very short time when, on October 29th, 2018, in Indonesia, Lion Air flying a new 737 MAX. Remember, it's a brand new airplane. It became impossible for the pilots' control, and the software kept trying to tip the plane down. The pilots are trying to get it back up. It keeps trying to tip down. It tips into a dive, and the airplane software won, and all the people on that aircraft lost. They were all killed in Indonesia. So they started looking at, well, you know, we'll look at some things. Maybe the pilots weren't properly trained. So hubris. Boeing should have grounded the entire fleet. They didn't. And then in March, 5 months later, Ethiopian Airlines 302 on March 10th, same thing. The pilots are taking off and they're saying, this airplane keeps wanting to pitch down because the software on it had bad readings from sensors, and the pilots are fighting the plane. Then the software is saying this, pilots are saying that, they can't disengage it, and the Ethiopian aircraft goes down. On both flights, 346 people lose their lives. Over what? Bad software, bad sensors that were tested improperly. Guess what? A whistleblower would leave Boeing and say, you know, the FAA that's supposed to certify, they so trusted Boeing that Boeing and its hubris were able to push the United States FAA to approve the 737 MAX. And yet the software that was in there and the way the sensors were set up, it gave bad readings, and it said, no, we got to go this way. So the planes are trying to pitch down. If you've ever thought about flying or being a pilot, just remember two things. Houses get bigger, bad. Houses get smaller, good. You know, so if the plane is trying to pitch down and buildings and things on Earth are getting bigger, this is horribly bad, especially on commercial airliners. But there is hubris there, and the ability in that hubris to influence the United States FAA that approved it. Well, obviously, after the two disasters, it gets pulled and didn't fly for a long time. As a matter of fact, Southwest and other airlines, you could say you don't want to fly on a 737 MAX. This is after it was recertified, put back in the air, and Southwest wouldn't charge you a change fee. They'd say, okay, you can fly on this. That's going to be an older 737, not the MAX. But people were very concerned about it, to the point that airlines that had bought these very expensive multi-million-dollar aircraft, they're fixed, they believe they're perfectly fine now and they can fly, and there hasn't been any incidents since, with the sensors and the software repaired, you know, updated, tested fully. But people would still say, I'm not getting on a MAX, and so airlines had to do that. So where's the message in the lesson for you and me? It was hubris that overcame Stockton and all the things he could do building this sub, and we're going down there. And 10 voyages into it, the 10th voyage is what we believe is the right number here. 4 to 5 tests, and then mission number 5 with people. Does that sound like the Comet? A little like the Comet?
100%.
That you got going? Hey, our airplane's in the air. What a great thing. We're the first jetliner. Go us. 1,000 flights into it. All that fatigue takes over, and they're falling out of the sky. In this case, it only took the 10th, approximately what everyone believes to be, the 10th or maybe 11th voyage down to the Titanic, when the stresses that had repeated on that hull made of carbon fiber that other people would be like, that's not the way I would build that, imploded, killing the 5 people on board, and we lost a brilliant oceanographer, and we lost a British billionaire and a Pakistani billionaire and his son. Those are the tourists that were lost. Along with French oceanographer, James Cameron, very upset about it, was a great guy. The world has lost one of the foremost experts on underwater archaeology and studying the things of the deep. Lost him thanks to hubris. And yet 60 years ago, something similar happened with a not fully tested brand new design, and they thought it was working for a year. And then they approached 1,000 flights when the design of those windows and the airframe and the fatigue got to the point that they didn't even know that plane was unsafe from day one. We can go there. We look at the 737 MAX and what hubris and the ability to influence the FAA did. We also look at the Challenger disaster, you know, the O-ring disaster, and the United States lost the space shuttle. Hubris was at the core of it. Let me tell you something. You don't have to be in something that is got human life at risk where hubris can hurt. You can launch software without testing and lose your reputation and have to lay off people that you shouldn't have had to lay off because suddenly people won't use your software because it wasn't ready for prime time. You can do it that way. You can put out food products that make people sick, and thank God no one dies, but you lose your reputation. And sometimes it's hubris and the desire to stay ahead. But you can also build in something called patience, prudence, and testing. PPT. Patient, prudent, testing. And not testing forever, but put enough QA into your software so you don't embarrass yourself and that you don't lose your reputation, have to lay off people that work so hard on that software. You know, protect them from themselves with testing. And that is the job of every leader, not just to lead with vision, but to also lead with practical assurance of the quality of the product. Because hubris, we're just doing it, just do it, just do it, gets people killed in certain situations. You can also lose your company in other situations. And that's what happened here. And so hubris is a horrible thing. And so I hope that case study, God rest the souls of the people from the Titan, but I hope we can see that history has repeated itself because technology has become more advanced, but humans and our ability to kid ourselves and lie to ourselves and to be full of ego and hubris hasn't changed in 80 years of high technology, transportation and ocean exploration.